Hey, good morning or good afternoon, wherever folks are. Thanks for tuning in with us. I am going to be talking about the web IDE that we've been developing for a little while now. Before I get started, I'll just ask this poll question real quickly. Curious about what types of tools ECL developers regularly use. Let me see what the options were that I put in here. The desktop IDE for Windows or Visual Studio Code. If you typically run a local VM for your development or some mixture of all those things. Just pick whichever answer is applicable for you. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is the motivations for creating the web version of the IDE, and then kind of very briefly the current implementation of it as far as like the technology that were used, and then a brief demo, just kind of walking through some of the features as it exists currently, and then talking about future plans for development. So the motivations for creating it, there were, as far as I can recall, the initial conversation that I heard about was for training environments where I think it was primarily the like in-person training classes where there could be a group of people and you're not entirely sure what their history is with development of any type or ECL in particular, and sometimes there were some complications of getting everybody on that, first starting point, like what all do they need to have installed? Did they do that ahead of time? And I was kind of maybe tending to eat up a little bit of time in some of those training sessions. So they were discussing like the idea that it would be nice to just have something that people could just kind of sign into and immediately get going as quickly as possible. Another one of the things that's kind of beneficial with the web version is the ability to kind of have a workspace that encapsulates several scripts and potentially files that you're using, and then the ability to like share that as a URI with somebody else that will then import that into their instance of the IDE. Also, we try and like ease in newer developers to ECL with automation of some of the more common tasks, kind of like Flavio was talking about at the start, with needing to upload a file and then having to explain to a person that might be brand new to ECL, you upload the file to landing zone, and you need to actually spray that file in whatever format would be appropriate, and layout definition, all that kind of stuff. And then lastly, handling of dependencies. So with the IDE, I think there's on the Hpcc systems GitHub, there's an ECL bundles repo. That might not be the exact name of it, but it kind of lists, I think it has it separated out by various categories. These are the ones that are supported. These are some other ones that are recommended, or I forget what the actual categorizations are, but pretty much all of those bundles, if I'm remembering correctly, those just kind of, we install that in the instance. It's part of the Docker container definition. So the way that it's currently implemented, the server application is built with Node.js. It's running just kind of a very thin Express server that is primarily concerned with saving any assets that are required for the application to run in a local database. The workspace definite users workspaces that the user has, their data sets and scripts, and then it serves as like a thin wrapper and proxy for the ESP endpoints that are called for interacting with the clusters that you work with. And then the client is just kind of server rendered HTML with ECMAScript 6 JavaScript. Primarily is taking care of, I mean, aside from just the general UI, parsing of data sets that you might upload through the interface into ECL, and then acting as the launching off point for interacting with the Hpcc cluster. So it's pretty much only built for modern browsers, which has gotten much nicer in recent years. They don't to be concerned about IE anymore, thank goodness. So Edge is a really nice Chromium-based browser. But there are some functionalities that don't really work at all, just due to the version of JavaScript that's required. So, but pretty much any, you know, modern Chrome, Firefox, whatever, you'd be good to go. And then lastly, it's, as I mentioned before, it is Dockerized. So running it on your own, you should be able to just start the Docker container and it'll start up the various things that are required. So for a demo, I'm actually just going to show some screenshots here instead of trying to work through something and then probably have it fail on me while I'm doing it. So I will mention that the IDE, there is a version of the IDE available at the URL on the screen, ide.hpcc.com. You can go there and sign up for an account and go to test drive. It currently only is configured to work with the public playground cluster. There is also like an Azure cluster that kind of shows up there that we're using for some external student-based trainings. I can't remember the name of the organization. I think it might just be Code Day, but they have some programs that they run with various, I think, primarily high school age, maybe some colleges as well. And so that cluster is kind of started up currently for, I think there might be one happening this weekend or sometime in the near future. But yeah, ordinarily it would only be pointed at the playground. So, but just kind of briefly going over some of the features. I might have been a little too selective in the way that I cut up these screenshots, but what's being shown here is uploading a CSV file. And once you've selected a file from the file system, let me see what this is highlighting. Yeah, okay, hopefully that shows up on your screen, right? That outline around the bottom section. But when you select a file, it'll parse the file up to, I don't know, a few hundred or thousand lines and give you an example of what that looks like with the columns and then the first row sample values, just so you can see if something looks out of sorts. And then once you've uploaded that file, what's being shown on the right-hand side, that kind of blue tealish thing on the very far right was actually the mouse cursor. There's a sidebar that shows assets, scripts, and data sets and things. And when you click on a data set and drag it over into the script editor, it'll, the ECL that was associated with that work unit for creating the for file is like attached to that object in the UI. So if you were to drop that into the script editor, it would pre-populate with that. The most useful part being that highlighted section of the record definition, so that you could just drag it and, you know, you wouldn't have to type all that out again. So secondly, and this is currently something that's kind of behind a configuration flag right now. It's not quite ready to go, but parsing of more like complicated, I guess, data structures like JSON with some type of structure to it. So it works a lot like when you're working with the ECL Watch. It specifies that row path or like X path of where in the object you want to, because the JSON might contain, you know, some blob of metadata that's not really the list of records that you want to interact with. So you kind of supply that X path, and then it will, very similar to the CSV at the bottom of that screenshot, you can kind of see it's parsing out the first object and giving you an example of what that's going to look like. And then when you click the go button, it will upload the file to LNRS, spray it, and then go ahead and create the record definition with recursing through sub-objects to create these child records, and then kind of trying to automate all that for you. I've just been going through like data.gov, finding random large JSON files and testing it with that. So just going to continue doing that until fairly confident that it's working the way that it should be before we kind of make it live. And then the code editor itself, it's using the code mirror that is available on the Hpcc JS visualization JavaScript framework. So it works kind of like you would expect it to. It gives you syntax highlighting for ECL, and if you were to introduce a syntax error or something like that, you'll get annotations in the gutter that show you the exception messages that came back from the compiler. And then something that was, so in this screenshot, you can see that sidebar on the left was kind of what I was talking about earlier, where it's sort of a file explorer view, and those data sets in the top section, if you were to drag one of those into the editor, that's how you get that boilerplate code. But something that was kind of added fairly recently was the ability to have multiple editors. So in this view here, there are just 2 script files open with tabs, but you might be using, say, some kind of a module that you then want to reference in another file. So having the ability to like click one of those tabs and drag it over to the right-hand side, and then that will kind of invoke a second instance of the code mirror that you can reference between the two, and just makes it a little easier to edit things. And then you can also see that sidebar is collapsible as well, just to give you a little bit more screen real estate. And then as far as executing code, so this ECL, I don't know if you guys have seen Rob, I think it's Rob Mansfield at ProAgrica. I might not be remembering his name correctly, but at the last Hpcc conference he gave pretty cool talk talking about Dapper ECL. And so that's what this ECL in this example is it's importing the Dapper library and then just running through exactly his example that he had in that presentation, which is, I think, some sort of Star Wars related thing, calculating Jabba the Hutt's body mass index. But anyway, what this is showing is the way the outputs work. If you have multiple outputs in a script, it creates those tabs in the top section associated with each output, and you can just click between them and it will repopulate the data table area with that data. Yeah, and then the ability to use visualizations as well. This is an example of using the actual ECL module, the visualizer. So the way that this is working is it's actually just running that module and then looking at the ECL watch and seeing that there was that report generated, the resources index JavaScript and some CSS, and then it actually just kind of pulls that in as an iframe into that area in the back. You can also use that with data patterns as well. I'm not sure if, yes, okay, I did include a slide here talking about that. So if you import the data patterns library, you can likewise get that report for, you know, what your file looks like, how you define the record versus maybe what you should have used for field lengths and whatnot. And then as far as future plans go, so we want to further integrate usage of the Hpcc JS. Gordon and his team have, you know, done a lot of really cool work there, and we want to lean on that a little bit more than we have been doing in the past. Some other things are, we're looking at using sockets for communication, which would enable, currently there was some just kind of arbitrary file limit on uploading a file just due to HTTP timeouts and things. So I think it was like 16 or 32 megabytes, which we had done for some time ago and haven't gotten around to changing yet. But we want to change the way the server communicates to the Hpcc, making use of sockets so that you could just stream large data sets. That would also enable things like having multi-user workspaces, where potentially in a training course you could then look at having remote training as well that would maybe function a little bit more like in person, where you could have an individual maybe ask a question of one of the moderators, and that moderator would be able to like jump into that person's environment workspace, and it would probably look something like you've seen in Google Docs or Office 365, where you have multiple people editing one document and they have multiple cursors that are color-coded or however. And then additional just kind of further UI and UX improvements, really wanting to try and make using the application as quick as possible and kind of grow with the person's knowledge. So adding in like shortcut keys for doing things, and that kind of control P like functionality, which you've probably seen in most modern development environments, where it's sort of a like do anything command where you just start typing in things. And an example here is like say help ECL and then a function name that might, you know, directly open in a new tab a link to the relevant PDF document and then jump you down to that function definition so that you can see, just kind of more quickly find the things you're wanting to learn about. And then just kind of looking into more code mirror features that we haven't necessarily taken advantage of yet. Also, this is just kind of a, maybe not necessarily a definite thing, but investigating features of progressive web applications. So it currently works in mainly the just most trivial way, in that it has a web manifest and there is a web worker registered. So if you're using Chrome, for example, and you go to the IDE subdomain, you'll get a prompt in the address bar to install the application. And it really just kind of, you know, gives you a shortcut on your desktop environments, desktop. And then it opens in like kind of a headless Chrome window, so it hides a little bit more of the browser's UI so that it looks like it's a self-contained desktop application. But there are more interesting things about that, like currently when you execute a work unit, you can, rather than clicking run every time and invoking all that's involved with that, generating a new work unit ID, etc., you can click just show me the last results of the work unit. But with web workers, you can do interesting things where like you can have your network requests intercepted by the web worker in the client itself, so that it says, okay, based on some heuristic, the cache value for this result hasn't expired yet, so we can trust that whatever we have on this system is maybe good enough, and then not even bother hitting the network at all, which also then enables, which may not be applicable at all, but it's just something to think about. Maybe it would potentially enable almost like an offline mode of this, where you could be developing code, at least it may, I mean, obviously would not be runnable in that instance, but you could at least be modifying code when you don't have a connection for some reason, if you are somebody that wants to be able to do that. But so just kind of things like that we want to think about. And then probably the most interesting thing is with the future platform changes, kind of like Flavio was talking about, the 7.8x or whatever version it is kind of, you know, eventually ready to go, being able to have containerized Hpcc, and because that's not currently really an option with the way our containers work for the IDE. You are reliant upon some other cluster out there that you then point to, but you know, what if you could have it all be entirely self-contained, so in the environment that you run, it has containerized Hpcc that spins up and down, would be kind of a cool thing to look into. So I think that, yep, that pretty much does it for me. So I probably was talking way too quickly because of nerves or whatever, but I will end this with a poll and just say, do you guys think that having a web or cloud version of the IDE seems like something that would be useful for you? It's kind of a yes or no, I guess. And
all right, Jeremy, thank you. I'm going to take a moment and go through your first poll question and the results of that while you take a look at the questions. We have several that have come in from the audience. in fact, still coming in. So take a look and prioritize those. And
okay.
Let's see. So the first question was, what tools do you regularly use for ECL development? 46% said ECL IDE, 33% VS Code, and 20% said all of the above. So that includes the local VM, and no one said others. So that's all good news. All right, let's see here. All right, the questions from the audience. All right, Jeremy, let's see. So first question, can you point the Cloud IDE to any Hpcc systems cluster that you work with?
Yes, you can do. Kind of like I was mentioning before, the public version is kind of only pointed at the public playground, play.hpccsystems.com. But the way that works is it's kind of application configuration, so it checks against a whitelist that you could change. We don't really have, this is kind of something that came up in the InfoSec analysis of making this application live. Was the way that it worked previously was it just kind of let a user define, like type in what is the URL of the cluster you'd like to execute this ECL with, and InfoSec was like, maybe not, because you can just proxy requests to any random system. So we're still kind of trying to think of a way to allow people to enable the clusters that they would like to work with on a easier basis than having some sort of administration do it all the time.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to our next question, if you're ready. So someone says, great tool. So I'm sure that's great news for you, Jeremy. Could you remind us of the URL again?
Yes, that was ide.hpcsystems.com.
All right, perfect. All right, and here's another question. Does Cloud ECL IDE support Roxy jobs?
That's a good question. I don't know, actually. I haven't done much work with that myself. I would say you could create an account and try executing Roxy queries. Sorry, that's not a very good answer, but.
All right. So sometimes Bob Foreman or Richard Taylor or Hugo, maybe if they're online, if you happen to know the answer, if you could send something through questions to the audience so we could see that, that would be awesome. But Jeremy, there's so many questions coming in. I'm going to give you a moment to read those questions, and I'm going to give the results of your second poll question. So you can take a few moments there.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So your second poll question was, would you have a use for this ECL Cloud IDE in your work? And 80% said yes. So that's fantastic. 13% said no, and 6% said it's not applicable, but overwhelmingly it looks like this is a tool that people can really use, and that's fantastic. All right, so let's go back to these questions. Can I share the code or the workspace in some way?
Yes, you can do. There is both a mechanism for sharing a workspace to another user of the web ID as a URL, so that they then import that into their own group of workspaces. Or similarly, there's a way to say if you had a workspace or collection of ECL scripts that you had created in some other tool, VS Code, for example, and you have that as a zip file and you wanted to send it to somebody, you could just email them a zip file, they could import that into the IDE and would create a workspace from that. And then likewise, you could go the other way. If you were using the web IDE and you wanted to send some code to somebody that wasn't, you could create a zip archive of your workspace and send it around that way.
All right, so here's another question. What are the limitations of the web ECL IDE?
Limitations. So currently, maybe one of the biggest limitations is kind of like I was mentioning before, the ability to only have it pointed at a cluster that has been like whitelisted by the person that spun up the instance. And then the typical like networking considerations is kind of a big thing. So it would be kind of on the person that owns the instance to take care of. So for example, if you were, you know, internal to LNRS and you wanted to be able to access a cluster that is internal to the network, it might be a little complicated to have the network routing configured in such a way so that the IDE could, if the IDE were, you know, just in some random cloud, AWS or Azure or whatever. And then other limitations, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm sure that I'll think of a handful of things once this is over. But at the moment, those are kind of the two big ones that jump to mind.
All right, thank you. All right, it looks like somebody has a comment for you, some kudos. It says, this is an awesome tool for classroom setting. Completely eliminates all of the problems with getting students set up with the ECL IDE. Fantastic job. So thank you for the person who sent that in. All right. Let's see. Jeremy, I think we have time for one last question, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Let's see. Okay, it's a very nice tool indeed, so thank you for that. Is there a place where we can have access to documentation about the web IDE?
No, not really.
Okay.
There isn't really any, the documentation that is kind of self-contained in the IDE itself isn't really specific to the IDE, but just kind of documentation about ECL. So there are some links under the help menu, I think, of the UI that will direct you to like an ECL cheat sheet that had been created in the Hpcc Systems GitHub organization. And then just direct links to like the ECL language reference, but not really much documentation about the IDE itself, unfortunately.
Okay, and if people have questions, though, the forum is probably a good resource, I'm imagining. People could put questions there.
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
a good place, or what do you recommend?
I spend a lot of time myself in the Hpcc forums, just kind of asking my own questions while developing this. So yeah, if I see them there, I'll try and answer, or certainly feel free to email me any questions that you have.
Okay, perfect. And Jeremy, is this public to all ECL developers? Can anyone access this?
It is public. So the ide.hpcsystems.com is a public URL, but it's only sort of like the playground. So it only connects to the playground, and you know, the sort of data that you would upload there is the sort of data that you could use to interact with. You can also, it's not currently available on GitHub. We want to make this public to GitHub as far as like the code base, so that people can download it and run it in their own environment. And hopefully we'll have that soon. But for anybody internal to the company, you can find it on GitLab. So if you want some information about that, then please email me.
All right, perfect. All right, somebody had sent in a question about that, so just watch, and if you don't see it in the near future, reach out to Jeremy, and his email is here, or certainly reach out in the forums and let us know. All right, fantastic. Jeremy, you've been on the hot seat for a while. Thank you so much. Obviously, another very interesting presentation, so thank you.